Hey there, Grumpy Old Fart here. This is a compilation video of some of my greatest hits. Hope y'all
I
enjoy
talk a
it.
lot about UFOs because go back and look at my video UFOs. Evidently, the Navy announced, explains it there. The Navy announced that the UFOs are indeed real, and if they're real, there's two options: they're either from Earth or not. If they're not from Earth, they're from someplace else, which means somebody else is driving them. Now, if somebody else is driving them, that lends a whole different facet to some arguments that have been going on for decades in our country, namely alien abductions. So, rather than talk about this time in this video, rather than talk about a specific alien abduction event, I want to talk about alien abductions in general. Okay? For those of you who don't know, alien abductions happen all over the world. There are people who claim to have been abducted by beings from other worlds and taken aboard spacecraft, and they have medical experiments performed on them. People are taking sperm and ovi. It's a traumatic event, very traumatic. Now, I'm not saying that every person who claims this is honest, telling the truth. They may be crazy. I don't know, but because the Navy announced that UFOs are real, we have to again look at this phenomena with give it a little bit of credence, because what if they're telling the truth? Shit could happen to you or me or anybody else. Could happen to your kid. As a matter of fact, sometimes it does. Here we go. There are some common symptoms that people report when they've been apparently when they've been abducted by these aliens. A lot of them have nosebleeds and other mysterious injuries, like marks, scars, bruises, burns that they can't explain. One lady, at least one, quite actually a lot more than one, they have what are called scoops, where it looks like somebody has scooped out a little tiny piece of their skin, a tissue sample. That happens very frequently in these cases. People have strange dreams about ghosts, aliens, and doctors. Okay, this happens a lot. Yeah, so if your kid's having dreams about visiting a doctor and the doctor's hurting them, so look into it, because it may not be a dream. I'm just saying. I don't know. Again, I'm not saying this is real, because I don't know. But the amount of cases that are reported of this, the amount of these incidents worldwide, somebody should be looking into it with some seriousness, not just the kooks. Somebody needs to be looking into this. A lot of these people who claim to be have been abducted have implanted fragments. They call them alien implants. There was a doctor, and these are physical items. There was a doctor, he died recently, and I cannot remember his name. I'm doing him a disservice, because I had his name in my head a few hours ago, but now I can't remember it. But this guy made he made a lot of documentaries and a lot of noise, because he was taking items out of people, little fragments that looked like shrapnel to me. But according to this doctor, these items, these things that he was taking out of people, didn't act like inanimate objects. He would try to incise the skin and go underneath and get it, and it would try to move from him, try to run from him under the skin, and he'd have to trap it and then bring it back and and go get it again. I mean, he died recently, so, and I can't remember his name. I wish I could. But this guy, he was a pretty competent guy. When he spoke, he didn't sound crazy. He sounded pretty lucid. He wasn't crazy. But the number of events that this guy participated in like this, removing implants from people, was astounding. I mean, it boggles the mind. If 1/10 of them are actually alien implants, there's something serious going on. We need to look at it. Another thing women report is having phantom pregnancies. They'll go to a doctor, and the doctor says, "Well, how's the baby?" "What baby?" You were pregnant, and no, I've never been pregnant in my life. Well, your body has signs of having been pregnant. Yeah, things like that. Okay. Missing time. I talked about that in another video. It'll be up soon. Where is it? Okay. Strange medical procedures, but no memory of it. Somebody will go to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Yeah, well, your surgery is recovering fine." What surgery? You've had surgery here on the blah, 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 blah. No, I didn't have any surgery. I've never had surgery in my life. That kind of thing. It happens quite a bit. Now, here's something else that's going to disturb people, especially parents. Excuse me. People whose children have emotional problems and draw strange pictures of odd people at their house or odd people in their room or just odd people. A common one is they'll draw a stick figure with a jack-o'-lantern head. Okay? One child referred to that as the doctor who hurt him. And she didn't like, or her brother, she didn't like the doctor because the doctor hurt her. Okay, that's freaky. If you're a parent, that should freak you right out. Other one is people whose children have any of these symptoms, because it's not just adults that go through this. Now, here's another thing that should scare the hell out of people. A lot of this is generational. Evidently, these aliens target specific women and other people and their descendants. So, especially with phantom pregnancies. So people report that people find out that they're being abducted, or at least they think they are. And they'll talk to one of their relatives. Yeah, mom said that too. What? Yeah. So they go talk to their mom, and their mom's had the same thing happen to her. And then she says, well, yeah, but grandma had it too. And or yeah, my daughter's doing it too, that kind of thing. So it's a serious issue. When it messes with your family, it's a serious issue. I don't care what it is. Okay? If they're messing with your family, your kids, yeah, something needs to be done about it. Many people report that these aliens are crossbreeding and creating alien human hybrids. Now, that seems far-fetched, but the number of reports of these that are happening around the world, and I talked about this in another video. At the fall of the Soviet Union back in, I want to say it was 1990, 1989, whatever it was, the fall of the Berlin Wall, information started coming out. These alien abduction cases, exactly like I'm talking about, were happening behind the Iron Curtain too, way back then. So, and I talked about it then. If you have a back channel to get information back and forth behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War, are you going to waste it on an alien abduction hoax? It's stupid. But there it is. Many people now here's another thing. Under hypnosis, abductees reveal what happened to them. They remember events. So evidently these aliens can mess with your memories. They can suppress memories of what's going on. Okay? A lot of these people who go under hypnosis remember that these events started when they were little kids. Okay, so these aliens are targeting little kids too. So right there, it makes you scared. If that doesn't scare you, nothing will. If you're a parent, if you have children, you pay attention to that. If your kid comes up and starts making weird drawings or starts, having discipline problems or has emotional issues suddenly, and is drawing strange pictures and things like that, you need to investigate further. It may not be just them acting out. It may not be teenage hormones or whatever. Check it out. For the sake of your kids, check it out. Don't dismiss it out of hand. And again, I'm not saying any of this is happening for real. I don't know. But the amount of reports of this that are so similar all over the world, if it's a hoax, it's a worldwide hoax with millions and millions of people involved, and it's been going on for decades. I'm just saying. If it's a hoax, it's a hell of a hoax. All right? So anyway, if any of this stuff has happened to you, or if you know somebody who is experiencing any of this stuff, talk to them. Tell somebody, okay? Because this could be a very serious issue. All right. For those of you who don't know, about a month and a half ago, the U.S. Navy announced that some gun camera footage that they got off the carrier Nimitz from some of the airplanes off the carrier Nimitz was indeed real. So the Navy has announced UFOs are indeed real. Now, because of that, I've been going back and looking at some old UFO accounts, UFO sightings and abductions and things like that. Because maybe these people weren't crazy. The Navy just said that UFOs are real, so maybe these people aren't crazy. And a friend of mine the other day asked me, what... Yes, you're my friend too, but you didn't ask me this. Asked me, why haven't UFOs been visiting us for years? You know, much earlier than that. Well, it turns out they have. Check this out. This report comes from LODI, I suppose it's Lodi, California, from 1896. Two men, Colonel H.G. Shaw and Camille Spooner, were traveling. They were going from point A to point B, you know, riding horses or whatever. And they came across three beings that were not human. This is the way the report reads. I'm telling you what it says. These alien beings, these non-human beings, were 7 foot tall and very slender. They tried to abduct the two men, but the humans were much too heavy. Apparently, big fat guys like me. The three non-humans jumped back into their spaceship and left. That's what the report says. Now, later on, Shaw wrote an account. Colonel Shaw wrote an account, which was published in the Evening Mail, which was a Stockholm or a Stockton newspaper. A Stockton newspaper at the time. And this is what he wrote. He said, quote, "I have a theory, which of course is only a theory, that those we beheld were inhabitants of Mars, who have been sent to the Earth for the purpose of securing one of its inhabitants." So, in his mind, they were going to get him and take him to Mars because the Martians wanted an inhabitant from Earth to take back. Luckily, he'd put on a few pounds, apparently, and the aliens couldn't throw him over their shoulder and run. So that's basically what it boils down to. They were too heavy. Now, this video kind of ties into another video that I made a while back. Go back and check out my video on the Aurora UFO crash from Aurora, Texas. This happened within a few years of each other. So these events, while across the country from each other, the two events together, taken together, show you that these UFOs have been around a lot longer than just recent times. I did a video the other day on, or just a little while ago as a matter of fact, on Nuremberg in 1561. So people were watching it back then as well. They saw an aerial battle with UFOs. Go check that one out. But yeah, this is from an attempted UFO abduction from Lodi, California in 1896. Cowboys and aliens, there you go. The Dixon encounter. Now, many of us have heard stories about little gray aliens, and they are by far the most popular and numerous of these reported by witnesses and abductees, the grays as they call them. I did a video a while back about a number of alleged alien races visiting Earth, and I do not recall any of those alien races being blue. Blue aliens are rare, but they have cropped up in witness reports for the last 150 years all over the world and on every continent. They're everywhere, apparently. But they're rarely talked about. A man was allegedly accosted by blue aliens in the year 1900. His name was Dixon, and he lived in Australia. Mr. Dixon was working on his land, and he had a horse and a pack mule with him. A large gray disc flew toward him and then hovered over him. His horse and pack mule got spooked and ran off.
everything went dark. And when he could see, he saw 3 figures leaving the craft, which had landed nearby. They were tall humanoids with blue skin. They led him inside the craft and into a circular room. Several more blue-skinned men arrived, and they began to undress him. He was paralyzed, though, and through the whole incident, he was paralyzed. He couldn't move. He couldn't stop them. He was just there for the ride, as it were. He was strapped to a metal bed and examined. The blue men had all sorts of strange handheld objects. When they were done, all but one of them left. That one helped Dixon off the table, and he got dressed. The blue being then led him into another room through a door which had opened with the touch of which this being had opened with the touch of a finger, which was very uncommon in 1900. I mean, they had elevators, but they were usually in big cities and like that. But touching a button and a door opening, yeah, that was very uncommon back then. There was a huge window in this room, and Dixon looked out. He saw that they were really high up above the clouds. Excuse me. The crew never spoke to him, but rather chattered amongst themselves in a weird language he could not identify. He obviously couldn't understand it. As he watched, the craft descended and landed. When the door opened, Dixon grabbed a device off of a nearby table and ran out. The device was one of the metallic instruments that they had used to examine him. One of the blue men gave chase and caught up to him pretty quickly. These things are apparently very, very fast. There was a scuffle. The alien being, the blue man, pulled the device from his hand and then ran back to the craft, which then ascended and left. So you hear about all these cases where the guy, if they want us to believe it, they should grab something off of the ship. Well, Mr. Dixon tried. I mean, what else can you do? It ain't like he could defeat a bunch of them in a fist fight. I'm just saying. Dixon wandered for a few hours until he found a ridgeline that he recognized. He followed the ridgeline and he came to one of his neighbor's homes where he was given food and shelter for the night. He returned home the next day. Now, I did another video a while back wherein an abductee tried to abscond with an instrument from the craft to prove his story. Evidently, no alien wants their presence known, at least not proven. So, that being said, all those people who say, well, next time grab something off of the table so that we know. Well, you know what? People have tried. It's not like they haven't tried. Humans aren't completely stupid, I mean, they know nobody's going to believe them, so they got to find some proof. The aliens apparently aren't, I guess, willing to share. They're not willing to give us that proof, which makes sense because they've been hiding all these years. It's not like they're landing on the White House lawn,
I did a video on the Betty and Barney Hill alien abduction, and I wanted to follow it up because that wasn't the first modern recorded UFO abduction case. I found the first one apparently. This guy was in 1957. I did not write down where he was from. Sorry. But his name is Antonio Villas Boas, B-O-A-S. Okay? It was from 1957. He and his brother saw odd lights in the sky for several nights in a row. And later on, while working at night in the fields, because it was so hot during the day, they worked at night. He and his brother saw a reddish light in the sky. Well, a few nights later, he's working alone in the fields, and he saw this reddish light again. But it was approaching, he saw it was a saucer, an oblong-looking saucer with odd lights on it. It came down to land, and he was scared. He fled. He ran to the tractor, tried to get on the tractor and to drive away, but the tractor died. So he made a run for it. He tried to head back to the house. a small figure in some kind of a suit with air hoses attached to it tried to grab him. He shook it off and he tried to run again. But he was surrounded by three of these things, three of these beings. He was taken aboard their craft. They undressed him very carefully, making sure not to hurt him. And he was fighting the whole time, but he was overpowered. There was three of them. They got his clothes off. Their alien language was indescribable. He couldn't even describe what it sounded like. When he reported this incident later. Excuse me, still fighting that cold. He couldn't tell you what the alien language looked like or sounded like. He couldn't describe it. They covered him in a clear liquid and took blood from his chin, and doctors later verified the marks that they left when they did this. He was made to have sex with a beautiful alien, his words. They used some kind of a smoke, apparently, as an aphrodisiac. You hear people talk about, well, the next time there's an alien abduction, reach out and grab something and put it in your pocket so that we know it was real. Excuse me, to verify that it's actually happening and you're not hallucinating or whatever. Well, apparently this guy did try. This was in 1957. He tried to steal a little device, but one of the aliens got very violent, so he couldn't get it. He got caught. Busted. At any rate, so they returned him, and he, of course, reported the incident. Now, here's the thing. That story in and of itself sounds a little far-fetched, but the part that gets me is afterwards. The medical examination showed the marks on his chin where they had drawn the blood, and he suffered from radiation poisoning and some other serious ailments for months afterwards. That's not faked. That's not. I mean, you can fake a lot of stuff physically to fool the doctor. Kids do it all the time to get out of going to school. But let's try to fake radiation poisoning. Okay, that's asinine. Something affected this guy. Okay, now I'm not saying one way or the other. I don't know if this guy was telling the truth or what, but I know this: you can't fake radiation poisoning. That's a serious thing, and it's prevalent in a lot of these cases. So, again, I don't know if this story actually happened or not. There's the information on it is kind of vague, and there's not a whole hell of a lot out there. At least not that I could find. If somebody else finds more information on this, stick it in the comment section. I'm sure people would like to hear it. But this apparently is the first modern alien abduction case that's on record. This guy is a very down to earth individual. He works on a farm, so somebody somewhere might be able to give more information than me. If so, like I said, put it in the comments. I'll be glad to listen. Be glad to read your comments. But the Betty and Barney Hill story is the one that other investigators compare their cases to, but this one is the first one. I don't see a missing time element here, but otherwise it's very, very similar. You know what I'm saying? So, at any rate, take from that what you will. Was this announcement by the Navy that their pilots actually videoed and photoed real UFOs. Now we have to kind of give credence to some of these other reports that we've seen over the years. And I've done a couple of videos on some very compelling UFO reports. But you can't really talk about UFOs without talking about the UFO abductees. For those of you who don't know, there are people who claim to have been abducted by beings from these UFOs. And before, people thought they were just crazy or maybe they're on drugs or whatever. But with this announcement from the Navy, you have to go back and look at this again. I'm going to start with this one. It's the first, as far as I know, the first real compelling UFO abduction case. Betty and Barney Hill from 1961. This was a couple, an interracial couple. He was a 39-year-old black man. She's a 41-year-old white woman. Respectable people, good people, intelligent people, solid, upstanding people. They went into Canada on vacation, and they were on their way back home, and they were in New Hampshire, and it was about 10 p.m., and they're driving along and see a star which seemed to move erratically. And so he told Betty about it, and they both kept tabs on it as they drove along. Then they saw it a little closer. Had multicolored lights, rows of them, rows of windows on it, and it was moving in a very unusual manner. He got out, he stopped the car and got out and went and looked at it with a pair of binoculars and saw it was no star. He could make out different colors of lights, like I said, multiple rows of windows, and he could see people inside the ship. It was a strange flying object being piloted by people. The next thing you know, they were being frightened by this thing, so they jumped back in the car and they took off. And they were driving like mad trying to get away from this thing. And they were driving just a couple of minutes, and it turns out they were 35 miles down the road. They had experienced something called missing time, which is very prevalent in these cases. You're doing something that should take a few minutes, and it's 3 hours later, or you're doing something that, you're driving for an hour-long drive and it only takes 5 minutes, and you're there, things like that. I mentioned in another video the New Mexico Rangers have a video on YouTube you can check out. They report this thing too. The guy's driving from point A to point B, and it's supposed to take several hours, and he gets there real quick in like 30 minutes or something. But anyway, back to this story. When they got back home, they were tired and they went to bed. The next day, Betty called her friend and told her about it. Her sister Janet and told her about it. And Janet said, "Hey, you got to call the Air Force and tell them about it." And so she did. And there was a Major Paul W. Henderson. He told her that the UFO was also confirmed on their radar. So it was corroborated. Okay. They had 2 hours of missing time that they couldn't account for. Total of 2 hours of missing time. They talked to Dr. Benjamin Simon, and this guy's a psychiatrist and a neurologist, and he is well known in his field. He said, basically, he put them under regressive hypnosis, and they recounted the events. Their automobile had stalled on the road. The UFO had landed in the middle of the road, and alien beings came to their car, carrying both Betty and Barney to the UFO. They were subjected to various medical and scientific tests. Before the aliens released them, they were hypnotized in order to keep their capture a secret. So the aliens had planted hypnotic orders in their head to keep it secret. These aliens were bald, about 5 foot tall, grayish skin, pear-shaped heads, and slanting cat-like eyes. And apparently this description very much described what would become known as the Greys. And if you're not familiar with that, it's prevalent in the UFO community. I'm kind of a buff, but I never really put much stock in it until I just thought it was great stories until recently. Now, this has become a very prevalent case in the UFO community because whenever other people claim to be abducted, they compare it to this case. This is a very groundbreaking case because you've got all the elements of modern UFO abductions. You've got missing time. You've got the aliens did medical experiments on him, taking him aboard the spaceship, and with these medical experiments, procedures of some kind. Skin samples, hair samples, nails had taken. Betty had gynecological testing. Barney reluctantly revealed that they had taken sperm samples. So there's medical experimentation going on. Again, I'm not saying this did or didn't happen. I'm not taking a stand on this. But with this Navy announcement, we have to lend credence to this stuff. And if it is happening, people need to be made aware of it, because it could happen to anybody. This is an average couple driving down the road. Excuse me. This is an average couple driving down the road in the middle of the night. 10 o'clock at night this happened. And if it could happen to them, it could happen to anybody. Barney Hill is a postal worker. Betty Hill worked with in child welfare development. Child welfare department, excuse me. I mean, these are about as average people as you can get in America. It can happen to them, it can happen to anybody. So, again, I'm not saying that this did or didn't happen, but their case is well documented, that with doctors and scientists. The craft that they said they saw was confirmed on the radar by the Air Force. So this is about as good an abduction case as it gets, and it's one that other cases are compared to for reference. So it's a standard case. It's the standard for alien abduction cases. And these are good people. They're not liars. They're well respected in their community. They're not kooks. Okay? So you can't talk about UFOs without talking about abductions, and this right here is the standard of abductions. So
Lynn Buchanan story. Now, I first read about this in a book by Jim Marrs, and most of my information comes from that. So credit to Jim Marrs there. He's awesome. Anybody, if you've not read his books, please do so. You're missing out. I'm just saying. This abduction event took place in the mid-1960s. There's more stuff that goes with it, but here we go. In the mid-1960s, Lynn Buchanan was moving to a different job. He was packing up to move, and his family had gone on ahead. He bedded down with pillow and blankets, eager to finish up in the morning. At about 2 a.m., he heard something coming down in the backyard. He was paralyzed and could not move. He heard people moving around both sides of the building to the front. Then he was standing in the living room, disoriented and confused. It was morning and the sun was up. He remembered nothing about what happened, so he grabbed his stuff and went, did his thing, and he didn't think about it. Later on, Buchanan became a military intelligence officer. He'd become inexplicably obsessed with returning to his home, wherever he lived, with a feeling that he had forgotten something. Well, one day his wife, when he was going back, his wife sarcastically asked, did you check the backyard? And at that point, memories flooded back. That one little comment triggered memories. Over time, and with various aids like hypnosis and remote viewing, he remembered what had happened to him. He'd been abducted with a plethora of other humans. When the alien realized he was awake, they let him sit with the pilot and observe how the craft was flown. He claims he was taken to another planet where he heard lots of screaming and laughing. Now that would scare the bejesus out of me, I'm just saying. For him, it was all very confusing. The aliens offered him a job as a pilot. It had something to do with the size of his hands. With the size of his hands. Sorry, my voice is still going. I'm getting over that cold. But when he learned he would never see his family again, he politely refused the job offer. So then he was returned and was standing in the living room, disoriented and confused. And from there he remembers everything else. Now that's a weird story. But it gets weirder. Years later, two men dressed in black
took him into a room in the back of the Defense Intelligence Agency and questioned him. They questioned him very thoroughly about the abduction. When he confirmed how the control panel looked and functioned, one of the men became excited and said, quote, "So that's it," close quote. Buchanan, being an intelligence officer, surmised that they had one of these craft and were trying to figure out how it worked. That makes sense to me. A year later, Buchanan was on a tour through a classified building to look at mock-up exhibitions of airplane crash sites. He noticed that one of the exhibits was an exact duplicate of the control panel like the one on the ship. He turned, without thinking, and told the officer that was conducting the tour that the control panel that the control panel was not out of an airplane, but rather was out of a flying saucer. The officer was shocked, but confirmed that it was reported to be from an alien craft. The group was almost immediately ushered out of the building and reminded not to talk about the visit. So there was a level of secrecy there in the building, obviously. And maybe he saw something he wasn't supposed to see, or they didn't. Either they wanted him to see if they got him through there to see if he would recognize it, or he wasn't supposed to recognize it. Maybe nobody was. I don't know. This is one of the more interesting reports in the abduction realm. The fact that Buchanan is an intelligence officer and is relating this story gives it tons of weight. People say, well, maybe it's disinformation. If he was a skeptic, or if it was disinformation, then it would follow that he would deny the abduction happened. But he's technically an enemy in the ufology field, and he's relating an abduction story. And he's relating these events. That adds, in my opinion, a lot of weight to it. Whenever I do these UFO stories, I try not to do stories that don't have any substantiation. To me, that speaks volumes. That's all I'm saying.
What we do know is that last year, I want to say it was in August. Might have been in August. Anyway, last year the Navy announced that they had some gun camera footage off of the carrier Nimitz, and this carrier, the aircraft, captured gun camera footage of real UFOs. It wasn't fake; they were genuine photos and videos of actual UFOs. Fast forward to this year, the Pentagon has made a number of announcements detailing that they have UFOs are real, and they have captured vehicles, craft that was not built on Earth. Now, people who have said to me that, oh, that doesn't mean it was aliens. Well, who the hell else could it be? Unless we have some sort of an orbital construction platform that we don't know about, or we have a base on the moon that's building, or maybe Mars or whatever that's building this stuff, and nobody told us about it. It ain't human. That's all I'm saying. So, because they've made these announcements, we now have to go back and look at some of these claims about UFOs with a little air of credulity, because a little bit of credibility, because these people may have actually been onto something. It may, obviously, a lot of these people probably hoaxing stuff, but what if they weren't? So they can't all be hoaxes. Let's go on to this one here. This guy here does not strike me as a hoaxer. Robert Matthews from 1966. Let me give this a little bit of background here. 1966, Vietnam was going on. There was the Tet Offensive was getting ready to go. I don't think it was quite there yet. There was a lot of unrest in the world. Our economy wasn't doing so well. There was a lot of social upheaval going on in America. Airman Robert Matthews was reporting for his first tour of duty in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And the bus driver let him off near a payphone and told him to call for a truck to pick him up from the base. To pick him up and take him back to the base. And he called for the truck, and when he hung up, he saw strange lights
in the sky. He called the base a second time because he was afraid, and he was informed that the truck had arrived but could not find him, so they had come back to the base. The interval between these calls was an hour. Matthews thought it was only a few minutes, and that is a classic example of what's called missing time. I talk about that in a video called the UFO abduction phenomena. I think it's one of the videos on my channel. You can find it. It's I talk about missing time and a few of the things that are indicative of UFO abductions. Missing time is a classic thing where you think you're standing there. One of my favorite ones is they go out to the porch, going to have a smoke or whatever, and somebody comes out and says, "Oh, there you are." Well, yeah, I just came out for a smoke. Well, we've been looking for you. Where you at? I was here. No, you weren't. We've been looking for you for 20 minutes or an hour or whatever. I was here. No, you weren't. We were out here looking. You weren't here. That kind of thing. Missing time. This here is a classic example. And I am sure that when this guy reported in, he was berated or some sort of disciplinary action may have been taken because his story doesn't jibe. He made a phone call, and when they showed up, he wasn't there, and then he makes a phone call an hour later. Yeah, you got to come get me. We tried. You weren't there. Well, I've been here. That kind of thing. But here's the thing. Later, under hypnosis, he recalled being taken aboard an alien spaceship. He was examined medically, and skin and blood samples were taken, also along with sperm samples. So this is a classic alien abduction. This guy was taken aboard a craft. He was examined medically. They took samples of, sperm and whatever, skin, blood, whatever. And then he was let off, and he didn't remember it. All he remembered was these lights in the sky that scared him. But he couldn't remember why. And so, yeah, this happens a lot in UFO abduction cases. The missing time and like that. Now, this guy being an airman in the Air Force, that part there would get me, because if he was reporting for his duty station, chances are he was in uniform. I'm just saying. The whole thing tells me that this guy wasn't taken seriously, and maybe they should have. And you can't really blame the people of the time, because his superiors, because if a guy calls for a ride and you send somebody out there and he's not there, and then he calls an hour later, and with a weird story about lights in the sky, yeah, you can understand their confusion there. You can understand their response. But this happens a lot, and I talk about this in some of my other videos. If this guy had been a pilot and he had reported this, he probably would have been desk bound and may very well have lost his career. As it stands, I don't know what this guy faced after that. I can't find any records, but this guy was obviously abducted, and I don't know. Again, I'm not saying any of this stuff happened. I'm not saying it's real, but because the Navy and the Pentagon have announced that these UFOs are actually real, you got to look at these again, because this is a worldwide phenomenon. It's not just in America, but these things are happening, and I don't think we can afford to ignore them any longer. This is the case, the 1967 case of Herbert Schirmer from Ashland, Nebraska. Now, the reason I do these cases like this is because the Navy last year announced that UFOs are indeed genuine. They're real. So if UFOs are real, and if they're not from Earth, we don't know where they're from. But if they're not from Earth, it's possible that these alien abduction cases could be real. And if they are, we need to start paying attention to them, because it's happening to a lot of people around the world. Not just Americans, but all over the world. Go back and check out some of my other videos. Now, let's get to this one. December 3rd, 1967. That was shortly after I was born. August 1967. Anyway, December 3rd, 1967. Ashland, Nebraska. Patrolman Herbert Schirmer, he's a cop, was making his rounds at 2 a.m. He saw what he thought was a truck parked by the side of the road. Red lights and that kind of thing. So he drove down to see if there was something wrong. And his headlights revealed a metallic, oval-shaped object hovering about 8 feet off the road. He watched it rise up with flames coming out from underneath, and it flew straight up and then shot out of sight. So he didn't think anything else about it, and he went and returned to the station, thinking that only 10 minutes had passed. Turns out it's actually 3 a.m. and a whole hour had gone by. So there's a missing time element. So go back and check out my other videos on alien abduction phenomena, things like that. You'll talk about missing time. Later, he developed a red welt on his neck and a headache, and he began to feel ill. Later on, under hypnosis, he revealed that after he had spotted the object, his car died and his radio went silent. A white object emerged and communicated mentally with him. It prevented him from drawing his gun, which he obviously wanted to do. At work, I carry a .357 Magnum, and Mr. Alien comes at me. Yeah, he's got to go through 6 rounds of that first. Steel jacketed hollow points. At any rate, the aliens apparently were friendly, so that's a good thing. They drew energy from the power lines, and according to him, they had a base on Venus. Now, that in and of itself sounds a little flaky until you realize there's another man named Jaime Maussan who has all kinds of pictures of what appear to be extraterrestrial craft in our solar system doing various things. So after watching some of Jaime Maussan's stuff that he's got on video that he got from NASA and people like that, it kind of, this doesn't sound so flaky no more. Anyway, this event was investigated, and the Condon Committee concluded that they had no confidence that it really happened. The psychologists felt that Schirmer believed in the reality of the events he described, but they had no actual evidence that it happened. Well, the red welt didn't do anything for him, apparently. Later on, Schirmer became the police chief, but he resigned after 2 months because he said he was being ridiculed by the townspeople, and his car was dynamited, and his wife left him. So this guy had some serious life problems besides somebody dynamiting his car. Schirmer's accounts appear in 2 books called Gods, Demons, and Space Chariots, and another one called Gods and Devils from Outer Space. At least one of those books is by Eric Norman. The article that I read wasn't real clear as to exactly who wrote what, but at least one of those is by a man named Eric Norman. So check out those books if you get the opportunity. This case to me was fascinating because it was a police officer. Police officers are not known. I mean, it's one thing to say a cop planted evidence on a that happens, but that is for personal gain. Cops that report UFOs, there's no personal gain in that. This guy actually suffered for it. So, it's a weird story. Not that UFO abductions, any of them are normal, but my point is, this is even weird for that. In 1967, January 25th, 1967, in South Ashburnham, 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 Massachusetts, Betty Andreasen was doing the dishes there in the kitchen shortly after 6:30 p.m. The rest of the family was in the other room. There's 7 kids, her mother and her father. They were all in the living room. She's doing the dishes. The lights in the house blinked, and then a reddish light beamed through the window. She got scared and ran in the other room to calm the kids because they were scared. So apparently the whole family saw this. Her father ran into the kitchen to look out the window. And according to him, he saw 5 odd-looking beings hopping towards the house. That's the report. They was hopping. These beings walked through the door, a wooden door. They went through the door as opposed to opening it and going in. And they put the family into suspended animation. These telepathic beings took Betty onto their craft, and examined her, and then she was returned, and that's what they remembered. This case was later investigated by J. Allen Hynek of Project Blue Book fame. and she did not remember the details of this until later, when she went under hypnosis. And she recanted a lot more about the examinations, more interaction between these beings and her family. She and her daughter both recounted the details. So apparently the daughter was also abducted and taken up for these things. Apparently these beings were 4 to 5 feet tall. One of them was about 5 foot tall. All the rest of them were 4 foot tall. So the tall one was the leader. They had pear-shaped heads, wide eyes, small ears and noses, and slits for mouths. And they did, according to this, they communicated telepathically. So that fits a lot with the Greys that we've heard a lot about, and a few other races. The used to be alien abduction stories were kind of tongue-in-cheek and kind of, oh, I'm a crazy person, you know. But now we're getting more announcements that UFOs and possibly even alien beings are real from credible sources like the U.S. Navy and the Pentagon. So now we look at these and we have to give them a little bit more credibility. If this lady and her daughter and her family are witnesses to this, perhaps it actually did happen. And if it did, it could happen to anybody. And if it happened to me and you, we got to figure out what the hell's going on. I'm not downgrading their story. My point is, if it's happening, we got to stop it, because this is a gross invasion of our personal, of our bodies, of our persons, and whole personal space, the personal bubble, you know. But apparently aliens don't care about that. So we gotta do something about that, because if it's actually happening, like these people are saying that I report on, then something's got to be done. This particular case is the Buff Ledge incident from August 7th, 1968. Michael Lapp, 16, and Janet Cornell, 19, were relaxing at a boat dock on Lake Champlain in Vermont. This was in the late afternoon, so it was, it wasn't dark, but the light was starting to ebb a little bit. They witnessed a large light approaching, and at first they thought it was Venus. Michael actually shouted, "Wow, Venus is falling." Soon, 3 smaller lights left the large one, and they put on a show, zigzagging around and, doing all kinds of aerial acrobatics. They did exhibit intelligent control. One of them flew over them, and then circled around and dove into the lake. It emerged a few minutes later and approached him. There was a transparent dome on top, and there were 2 beings inside. These beings had long necks, big heads, no hair, large eyes, thin, no lips on their mouth, very thin slit for a mouth, no ears, and they had 3 fingers. But that's all they knew, because they woke up later, well after dark. They reported it, but there wasn't a whole lot done at the time. Well, 10 years later, under hypnosis, Michael said that they were taken aboard the craft by a beam of light. Janet was being examined on another table. There were medical exams, samples were taken, and they had a mission to make life like ours other places. I don't know if that means the aliens are trying to make life like them here, or if they were trying to make life like us on other planets. But under hypnosis, Janet also confirmed Michael's account. So, 2 separate people under hypnosis saying the exact same things. So that's corroboration. Now, the investigator, Walter Webb, located witnesses to that light show over the lake that night. And 2 other employees of the camp reported a similar experience earlier that same summer. So these 2 weren't the first people that it happened to. So we have UFOs, a description of the aliens, corroboration from 2 different sources under hypnosis, and eyewitnesses to the event, and prior abductees saying the same thing. That's about as corroborative as you can get. Okay? Again, I don't know if these UFOs are, if this alien abduction thing is real. We know the UFOs are real because the U.S. Navy has told us that they are. And who are we to argue with the U.S. Navy? But if these alien abductions are real, we need to find out what's going on and put a stop to it, because I don't know, no matter how friendly they are, who likes being kidnapped and samples taken against your will? You know what I'm saying? There's laws against that. If a human did that, they'd go to jail. Well, these aliens, you go to a foreign land, you abide by their laws. That's all I'm saying. I'm sure if the aliens approached some of us and said, hey, we're friendly, we'd like to get a few samples if that's okay, there'd be people willing to do it. I don't know if I would or not. I don't know. It depends on how I was approached. But again, alien tries to take a sample for me that's against my will. Guess what? He's walking away. At least he's walking away limping at the very least. For those of you who don't know, here a few weeks ago, the Navy came out and admitted that some gun camera and photographic pictures that their pilots took of UFOs were actually genuine. So, folks, the Navy admits UFOs are real. Now, that being said, now that the Navy has admitted they're real, we have to go back and look at some reports that happened back in the day that people kind of scoffed at, because the Navy now admits they're real. So we have to do our due diligence and go back and look at these cases again, because maybe these people weren't crazy, maybe they weren't seeing things, maybe they weren't drunk or on drugs or something. Maybe they were telling the truth. Case in point, this is one of the more infamous UFO cases. Took place in 1973 in Louisiana. A man named Charlie Hickson, he was 42 at the time, and another man named Calvin Parker, he was 19. They worked at the shipyard there in Louisiana, and they went to, after the work they decided they wanted to go fishing. So they headed out to the river with their fishing rods. Very common in that area, very common all throughout the South. For those of you who don't understand the peace and the serenity of nighttime fishing, don't knock it. Okay, don't knock it till you try it. There's some oomph to that. At any rate, about 9 p.m., they're out at the Pascagoula River, and they're fishing off the pier, and they heard a buzzing sound behind them. So they turn around and look. About 10 yards away, hovering above the water, they see a UFO. And a doorway opens, and 3 creatures come out. 3. And these creatures are about 5 foot tall. They're humanoids. They have no neck. They're pale with wrinkles, very thick legs, ending like elephant feet. They have no eyes, but where their nose and their ears are, they have these carrot-like projections. Look like cones, And they had lobster claws. This is what the men reported. Okay? Now, both men reported being paralyzed and numb, and these creatures somehow levitated them into the craft. Anyway, they endured some kind of a physical exam with a floating eye. That's what they said. It was like a floating eye, and it did some sort of an examination. And apparently it did both of them. And then they put them back on the shore, and they left. Just left them there. After much deliberation, excuse me. After much deliberation, they decided they wanted to report this, because if this was happening to other people, they didn't want other people to go through this, and So they called Kessler Air Force Base, and they were instructed to report it to their local law enforcement, their sheriffs. Excuse me. The sheriff initially thought that it was a hoax or some kind of a trick. You know, UFOs on the Pascagoula River in Louisiana. Come on. So what the sheriff did, he wanted to catch him in this hoax. So he put them together in a room, and they had listening devices in there, and they recorded them. They recorded their conversation. And the idea being, these guys would talk amongst themselves and give it up somehow. You know, hey, I think we really got it going on this, you know, that kind of thing. Instead, what they got was a dialogue between the two that was pretty damn frightening. These guys were scared. They were really, really scared. Okay? I mean, this obviously was not a hoax. The sheriff immediately figured, you know, there's something to this. These guys believed what they were saying, and they were scared. They were scared. Now, later on, we find out that on the day before, 15 people, including 2 law enforcement officers, had reported seeing a UFO in the area. So there's corroboration there. People saw the UFO. The sheriff corroborated their story by secretly recording their conversation. Okay, and they've stuck by this. This was in 1973 in Louisiana, and these guys, they're very down to earth people. They don't have wild imaginations. This is a very, very credible case. Okay, these guys saw something that they can't explain. They experienced something that was very much abnormal. It wasn't a normal occurrence. So, night fishing, highly recommend it. Stress relief, nice and calm, serene setting. UFO abduction, not so much. But, you know, again, I don't know if this is true or not. I'm not making any claims one way or the other. But now that the U.S. Navy has admitted that UFOs are real, we have to look back on some of these cases with some credibility, with some discernment there, because a lot of these people have been persecuted and stigmatized, and maybe they're telling the truth. I found some information the other day, and I felt it was worth making a second video about this particular UFO abduction. So here we go. It's about the Pascagoula incident from 1973. I did a video on this. Go and check it out. It's a UFO abduction case where Charles Hicks and Calvin Parker were abducted while fishing overnight on a river there. And it was in Pascagoula, and it was from, like I said, 1973. Go and check that video out before you watch this one, okay? Now, I'm going to do a quick recap. The 2 men claimed they were taken when a UFO landed nearby, and 3 alien creatures with lobster claws kidnapped them. Now, the descriptions were very odd. The description of the aliens were very odd. A lot of people said they saw lights in the sky. Some reported UFOs in the area, that kind of thing. But nobody, until now, we didn't have any concrete evidence seeing things coming in or out of the water. 45 years later, a couple have come forward claiming to have seen much more than what we previously knew. Maria and Vernon Blair. Their claim is that on the night in question, they were sitting in their car looking out across the river. We won't ask what a young couple were doing looking at the river in their car in the middle of the night. Because, Anyway, they saw strange blue lights in the sky. They watched these lights go back and forth across the sky. Maria actually commented to Vernon that, quote, "There's something wrong with that plane. It's like he doesn't know where he wants to go." They thought it was an aircraft. They watched the strange lights for about 40 minutes. They decided to get out of the car and head down to the river. when they were heading down there, they saw a boat, so they started heading towards the boat. Then Maria spotted a strange figure emerging from the water. Maria thought it was a person. The figure then re-entered the water, so the couple waited for them to come back out, and when the water was rippling like they were moving away, so they waited and waited. Maria walked down the dock to see what was going on, and Vernon apparently went back to the car. Maria looked around, didn't see anything, so on the way back, she started kind of getting a little jittery, so she headed back to the car. On the opposite side of the river at that very time, unbeknownst to the Blairs, Parker and Hicks were being taken and having the most terrifying experience of their lives. Hicks has since passed, but Calvin Parker met the Blairs recently, and it was like old home week. Prayers for Mr. Hicks and his family, but we're thankful that Mr. Parker is still with us. When this couple met Mr. Parker, both of them said that it was like they'd known each other for years. They had spoken on the phone, but they hadn't actually met. But I tell you what, after all these years, I would imagine for Mr. Parker, it's nice to have somebody corroborate at least a portion of the story that he and Mr. Hicks told. Now, as you recall, in the original story, Parker and Hicks were sitting at the police station and they were being questioned by the cops. The cops left, but there was a recorder going. The two abductees did not know there was a recorder, and they were saying stuff like, I don't know, that's the most terrifying thing ever. I don't see how anybody could, I need something for my nerves, that kind of thing. So they weren't putting on a show. It was very compelling, very convincing. But now we have another couple, another two people who admit and have come forward and said that they saw strange things on the lake, on the water that night. So it's a bit of a corroboration for Mr. Parker and Mr. Hicks posthumously. My contention there is if the Blair couple saw that much, perhaps they should undergo hypnotic regression to see if what they remember was all that actually happened. Perhaps they themselves were abducted. We don't know. They don't know. They remember certain things, but the report I read was it left a lot of blank time, blank space. I'm not saying they were abducted, but I think it would be nice for them to undergo some hypnotic regression to find out if they actually did get abducted. That would be interesting. 2 abductions on the same night. That would be interesting. At any rate, I figured you guys would want to know that, and it's nice when a fantastic story is corroborated like that. And again, prayers for Mr. Hicks and Mr. Parker, and we thank the Blairs for coming forward. It takes a lot of courage, especially these days. On the Sandown Clown from 1973. I had never heard of this before. I found it in a video about it, and I looked up some articles for confirmation, and I conglomerated the evidence, or the article, the information. Everything that was common, I put in here. Here we go. In May of 1973, on the Isle of Wight, 2 children, that's right off the coast of England, by the way, 2 children were playing near a lake at around 4 p.m., and it was near the town of Sandown. That's why they call it the Sandown Clown. The children, a boy and a girl, were both age 7. They heard a wailing sound similar to that of an air raid siren. The children were curious, so they followed the sound through a hedge, and across a golf course. They followed it into a swampy meadow near the Sandown airport. The sound stopped then, but the children were still curious, so they continued on. As they crossed a wooden footbridge, a blue-gloved hand appeared from under the bridge. The hand had only 3 fingers, and it was attached to a strange being. The being climbed up onto the bridge while the children watched. It fumbled with what looked like a book and managed to drop the book into the water. It reached into the water and retrieved the book.
The being then walked a short distance to a UFO described as a metal hut. The being entered the craft, and the UFO began hopping around erratically. The children were confused but felt the encounter was over with, so they turned to walk back. Shortly, the being reappeared. This time, it carried what appeared to be some kind of a microphone shaped device. The wailing noise began again, and the children were scared, so they started to run away. The being then spoke into the microphone, saying, "Hello, are you still there?" It was asking, "Are you still there?" The voice was pleasant and friendly, so the kids approached the being. This being was nearly 7 feet tall, with no neck. It wore white pants and a yellow pointed hat. The hat connected to a collar on a green shirt. This sounds a lot like a spacesuit to me, I'm just saying. The hat had antennas and a black knob. Its face was triangular markings for eyes and a small square nose. It had yellow lips that didn't move. That sounds a lot like a mask to me. It had white cheeks and red hair on its forehead. Okay, I got nothing to say for that. That's weird. By all accounts, it looked like some kind of an odd clown. That hence the term the Sandown Clown. The being wrote into the book for the kids to read. It said, "Hello, I am All Colors Sam." The two children began a dialogue with the being. They found out that it was not human. They asked if it was a ghost, and it replied, "Well, not really, but I am in an odd sort of way." The being explained that there were many different types of beings like him. Then the being invited the children into the craft. The kids had to crawl through a flap, but inside it was as big as a 2-story building. The lower floor was huge with simple furniture made of wood and wallpaper with dials painted on it. The second story was small with a metallic floor. The being conversed with the kids in a friendly manner and told them there was a camp that the beings went to while they were foraging. The water there had to be cleaned before it could be drunk. A half hour later, the kids said goodbye and ran back to town. They told people they had seen a ghost. Now, this story in and of itself could have been the product of a children's vivid and fanciful imagination. However, other people had seen UFOs in that area for an extended period of time, beginning more than a year before and several years after the children's encounter. Another witness on the edge of town on that particular afternoon reported hearing what they described as an odd siren with no apparent source. This particular witness made a phone call, and the person on the other end heard the siren as well. They discussed it on the phone. Now, to me, this story has a ring of truth. When I first read this, the first time I read it, the inside of the craft being bigger on the inside with, dials and knobs all over. It's in the early 70s in England. These kids probably had seen Doctor Who. So that's I was the first time I read this, I was thinking, well, yeah, this, these kids, they're imagining, and their imagination is tainted by Doctor Who. The TARDIS is bigger on the inside. It's got a little. Back in the 70s, it had all these dials and knobs on the inside. But then you read this other stuff about the other witnesses. Other people had seen UFOs in the area, and another witness heard the siren. Yeah, to me, this story has a ring of truth. It really does. I don't do stories on here that don't sound at least plausible and have some sort of corroboration. The fact that other people heard the siren and it was audible over the phone, yeah, that tells me something was going on. So,
Travis Walton, 1975, from Arizona. All right. You guys may be aware of this one already. They did a movie. I think he wrote a book, but they also did a movie called Fire in the Sky. I want to say it was D.B. Sweeney was in it. Really good actor. Really good movie. If you haven't seen it, it's really good. Okay. A lot of big name actors. Really popular movie back in the day. I'm going to give you the basics of the case, and then we'll discuss it. There was a logging crew. Travis Walton apparently either ran it or was one of the foremen, and they were clearing out brush and stuff, deadwood and what all. So preventing like forest fire prevention, things like that. And they were working long hours because they were behind schedule. So they were working hard, and they're leaving, and it's nighttime when they're leaving. They saw a light in the sky, and so they pulled over thinking it was, excuse me, let me rephrase that. They saw a light. They didn't know what it was. They thought it might have been a forest fire. So they stopped and they got out to go check it out. Turns out it was a light in the sky. And Travis Walton approached it because he didn't know what it was. He was, I guess, trying to act, like a big He-Man. At any rate, he approached it, and according to the other members of the crew, a beam of light hit him and shot him across the clearing, and they thought he was dead. And it scared them so bad, they jumped in the truck and drove off. Okay? So, they zoom off. Later on, they come back, but he's gone. So they go back and report it to the police, local sheriff and things like that. And the police, they went out and started searching. And because of a lack of physical evidence, they thought maybe something happened and the crew was covering it up. Maybe he got killed or they killed him or something. They became prime suspects in his disappearance. So he was gone, and they were looking for him. Now, the investigation was getting serious into these guys, and people were really questioning what happened to this guy, because he's gone, and the crew says he was hit by a beam from a light in the sky. I don't know if they were actually using the term spaceship or aliens, but I don't know. But several days later, depending on which story you listen to, it was several days, a week and a half, or 2 weeks. So, the story has been told and retold, and every time you tell it, things change, and so you're not sure exactly what did happen. What we do know is they got a phone call from him, and they went to pick him up. I distinctly remember in the movie, he was naked and hiding in a rainstorm. Now, the details of his condition at that point are, again, the story has been told and retold so many times, you're not sure which part of it to believe. I'm trying to give you just what I know. According to him, he was examined by these aliens. There were a number of the most of the aliens were these little gray dudes that they talk about, what they call the alien grays. They're your standard Roswell alien looking dudes. And but according to him, there were also male and female humanoid aliens on board. So the crew to date has stuck to their story. They're not wavering. They're saying this is what happened. And lie detector tests have not, as far as I know, have not disproven their case. They're now. In all fairness, I have to say this: they were behind. The logging crew was behind on its work, and because of this incident, they were granted an extension on their contract. So I don't know if it got them any more money or not, but it definitely got them more time. So in all fairness, I have to say that. Now, that being said, if they're faking it, they took that hoax a little too far, because a lot of them could have been seriously prosecuted for this. They were looked at as suspects in a man's disappearance. If for whatever reason he hadn't shown up, or if it had went much longer, they could have been. I mean, the judicial process could have stepped in and taken taken these guys in and tried them. So, again, if this was a hoax, they took it a little too far. As far as I know, nobody has gotten any monetary. I think maybe Travis Walton wrote a book and he might have made some money off of it. And I know they made a movie off of it, so I'm saying he might have made some money off of that. But the rest of the crew, as far as I know, they're not making no money off of it. And to this day, they stuck to their story, and nobody has been able to disprove it. So, again, take from that what you will. It's possible that this guy was abducted by aliens in full view of a logging crew. And so, like I keep saying, watch the skies because you never know.
This is from the Aarons family. And it started in the fall of 1976 that we know of for this family. And basically what happened was the parents, Dan and Joyce Aarons, they awoke one night to their daughter standing up in the crib, and the crib was at the foot of the bed. And it was a kind of a weird situation. They wasn't sure what was going on. They thought they had a shared dream of a light floating above the child's crib, the baby's crib, while they were paralyzed. So they were paralyzed, the light's floating above the crib, and it scared the hell out of them. That's what they thought. But they didn't really think much about it. Okay? Well, 16 years later, that happened in 1976. 16 years later, the father, Dan, he was sitting at his computer, and he had an anxiety attack, a really bad panic attack. And the symptoms persisted for weeks. Okay, he was diagnosed as a panic attack, and the symptoms continued. They just went on and on and on. It didn't stop. Couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. After 6 weeks of constant fear, he happened to see a TV show about alien abductions. And it really piqued his interest because these feelings started coming back. And he had another attack. He had another attack when he saw pictures of a little alien looking around the corner, poking his head around the corner. He had another panic attack when that happened. Later, he saw another show about the same subject matter, and it started affecting him the same way. And so he started getting very, very curious about this. He decided he started visiting his doctor and a few other people, and the suggestion came up of hypnosis. So he decided to go under hypnosis to see if he could figure out what this problem was. Now, this is a very involved story, so I'm going to kind of shorten it a little bit. And I'm not disparaging these people. These are good, solid American people. They're good people. Okay. Apparently, in that first time when they saw the light floating above the crib, what had happened was the two parents and the daughter, all three, had been abducted by aliens, taken aboard their ship, and they had medical experiments done. And they were serious trauma going on. The daughter has since gone under, after that, went under hypnosis as well. She reports under hypnosis having played telepathic games with the aliens. The aliens are saying, if you choose the one I'm speaking of, you can go home. And the kid just wants to go home, so she's trying to choose what, I guess they're testing her telepathy or something, seeing if their telepathy works on them. I don't know. But that's what she reported under hypnosis. The mother, Joyce, she had implants removed from her nose where they had inserted something up in her nose. Now, the doctors that removed these implants had them tested, and they didn't appear to be anything abnormal. But who's to say? Because they're not alien. There's no exotic elements to them or whatever. Doesn't mean that they weren't constructed of materials that are common on Earth. That's not saying there aren't aliens. It's saying that there could be a common source for them, a normal, non-paranormal source, and that's possible. But the fact that it was up her nose, that doesn't make sense. I've I have seen shrapnel removed from people after artillery attacks, things like that, and I've seen shrapnel like where an artillery round hits a tree and the wood splinters go into people, that kind of thing. I've never seen an item removed from inside somebody's nose. Now, I don't have the most extensive knowledge of this, so I'm not claiming to be an expert. But to me, that seems a little weird. Now, apparently his daughter has been abducted a number of times. The daughter that they hypnotized has been abducted a number of times. And now, the daughter's son, their grandson, is talking about the little friends that play with him at night. That's just, oh my God, terrifying. And keep in mind, they don't actually remember these. This stuff comes out under hypnosis. So somehow or other, the aliens are abducting these people and messing with their minds so they don't remember it. Erasing memories or suppressing memories somehow. Suppressing. They can't wipe them out, I guess, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to come up under hypnosis. But they're suppressing these memories. So you have generational abductions in these families. In obviously some of these families. And if it happened to these, who's to say it's not happening to other people? And you may not know it.
Okay. The Casey County, Kentucky abduction from 1976. Now, I got to be honest with you, I thought I'd already done this one. This is one of the most widely accredited and best documented UFO sightings and abductions in history. And I honestly thought I'd already done it, but I can't find it anywhere on my channel. So I'm going to say I didn't do it, and here we go. 1976, 3 women, Elaine Thomas, Louise Smith, and Mona Stafford, reported seeing a UFO in January of 1976. They also claimed to have been taken aboard the craft and examined by aliens. Now, we're going to start at the beginning of the story. The woman's story as it begins as they left a restaurant where they had gone to celebrate Mona Stafford's 36th birthday. So she was 36. Well, on the road, they saw a bright object in the sky at about 11:30 p.m. The women said that they saw it come speeding down and suddenly stop and hover over their car. They described it as an oval-shaped craft with revolving yellow lights. They were trying to outrun it, but it stayed with them. Then a blue light filled the car, and then the car began shaking back and forth. They felt the car being pulled back as they lost consciousness. Now, I've done a video on missing time. Go check that out. They woke up in Houston, and I'm going to say it's Houstonville, about 8 miles from where they had encountered the UFO. But about 90 minutes had elapsed, so they did experience missing time. I did that video on missing time. Go check that out. All 3 women had headaches and burn marks on the backs of their necks. Now, that part by itself would have freaked most people out, and rightly so. Later, under hypnosis, in separate sessions, all 3 women told versions of the same story. During the missing 90 minutes, they were taken aboard the craft and given thorough medical examinations by the aliens. The aliens were scaly, blue-eyed, and telepathic. All 3 women passed lie detector tests. Now, you can't use a lie detector test in a court of law, but it's pretty effective. I'm just saying. One person can pass it, 2 people maybe, but all 3? Yeah. The women's story was featured on NBC, and the media attention skyrocketed. Most people thought it was a well-planned and coordinated hoax. Later on, a cafe owner who knew Stafford explained that whenever she retold the story, she cried and got really scared as though these aliens were coming back. This cafe owner reasoned that if Stafford were faking, she wouldn't get so emotional about it. And I completely understand that. This is something I have a little bit of experience with. Whenever a soldier is suffering from PTSD, yeah, if you think the situation is going to happen again, it can make you very emotional. A lot of people aren't equipped to handle emotional situations like that. So I understand the situation with her crying and thinking it's going to happen again. That would get me. I can't say how I would react to that. To the best of my knowledge, I've never been abducted by aliens, but that would freak me out. The three women, this is the sad part, the three women became outcasts in Casey County. The people thought they were faking, people thought they were hoaxers, they were ridiculed. Smith moved to Las Vegas, and Stafford moved to Stanford, Kentucky. Thomas apparently still lives there in Casey County, but it's taken a long time for the situation to die down for her. There's things going on that we can't explain. There's things that happen in nature that we can't explain. There are things people see in the skies that we can't explain. That's been happening for generations, for centuries, for millennia even. This meets every requirement of alien abduction as far as it's got everything. It's got missing time. It's got the UFO sighting. It's got the hypnotic regression to find out what happened and blah 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 blah. It's got everything. This is at least as pronounced as the Betty and Barney Hill story. So I'm just going to jump into this. In August of 1976 in Maine, four men, Jack and Jim Weiner, Weiner, I'm going to say it's Weiner, and Chuck Rack and Charlie Foltz were doing some night fishing on the Allagash Waterway in Maine. The four men were in a canoe, and everything seemed normal. Chuck began to get the feeling that someone was watching them. As he turned around to scan the area, he saw a large, bright sphere of colored light hovering motionless and silent about 200 to 300 feet above the southeast rim of the cove. He got the others' attention, and they all saw the glowing object. They all agreed that the object had a rolling, boiling, kind of a roiling liquid appearance to it. Charlie began using a flashlight to flash and blink at the object in an attempt to communicate, kind of like Morse code or whatever. The object immediately began moving toward them, and it emitted a beam of light which engulfed the four men. The next thing the four knew, they were back at their camp on the beach. And to them at the time, it felt like just a few minutes had passed. The object was above the water, and about 5 minutes later, it shot into the night sky and was gone. They suspected they had experienced missing time, but they would not investigate this further for another 12 years. Jim had suffered a head injury in an accident resulting in, let me try to get this right, temporal-limbic epilepsy. So he had a head injury and it resulted in a condition, and he was getting regular treatments for this. And during the regular treatment for this condition, he kept having recurring nightmares that he couldn't shake. He and his three friends from the trip were all nude and in a strange, quote-unquote, strange place. They were surrounded by, quote-unquote, strange, bug-eyed humanoids. Jim would also awaken at night and find these creatures surrounding his bed. He was paralyzed during these encounters, but sometimes they would, quote, levitate him, unquote, upwards. So he wakes up in the middle of the night. It's not a nightmare. It's not a dream.
These things are around his bed, and he's paralyzed. They levitate him up. So that seemed pretty common. The part that got me here was at the end, because it's one thing if a person or a couple gets abducted. This is 4 people being abducted simultaneously. But here's the part that got me. Through hypnotic regression, Jim and then eventually all 4 of them would recall a 2-hour experience wherein they were, quote unquote, mind controlled by the bug-eyed humanoids, and a series of humiliating and invasive medical examinations were perpetrated on them. Now that's pretty fairly common among UFO abductees, the medical experimentation and like that. These 4 all took lie detector tests, and all of them passed. Furthermore, separately, they all drew the same bug-eyed humanoids. So unless they got together and practiced this, highly unlikely. Now, Jack and Jim, evidently, had been abducted since early childhood. So it just went almost their whole lives. In 1988, Jack and his wife experienced an alien home invasion and abduction. So this continued on. Evidently, they saw a light outside. They went out to look. They saw this thing. They went back inside, praying or whatever that it was not going to happen. And next thing you know, the aliens actually came into their home. And this was all brought out under hypnotic regression. This particular incident left burn marks on his feet and other marks like the scoops. I talk about them in the alien abduction videos. Go check those out. But there's a lot of physical evidence that something did in fact happen. So we have 2 people who've been abducted their entire lives. All 4 of them get abducted at a lake. And then the abductions continue after that for the 2 men. And by the way, now Jack's wife and his family are also subject to these abductions. This was a big event. It really did happen. Lots and lots of physical evidence, and I had never even heard of this before. So I figured I'd talk about it. The part that got me was the alien home invasion, because this came out during a hypnotic regression, and it was very pronounced. If you find yourself suffering from nightmares and stuff like that, it might be something to look at. That's all I'm saying.